My girlfriend said, "It's over. I'm done pretending." Her friends waited for me to beg. Instead, I smiled and asked, "What messages?" Then I pulled out a folder that made every face in that room go pale. My name is Ethan Cross, and I am 29 years old, and I work as an event audio-visual technician for a mid-sized venue company that manages everything from corporate conferences to charity galas to wedding receptions across the city, and my job requires me to arrive early to set up projection screens and microphone systems and lighting rigs and to stay late breaking down equipment after guests have left, which means I see a lot of things that people assume no one is watching because they forget that the guy adjusting the soundboard or repositioning a camera is actually paying attention to who arrives with whom and who leaves together and what the body language between two people says when they think they are invisible in a crowd. I have been dating my girlfriend, Lily Harmon, for almost 3 years now, and she works as a coordinator for a nonprofit organization that partners with various vendors and corporate sponsors to organize fundraising events and community outreach programs, which is actually how we met because her organization hired my venue company to handle the audio-visual setup for a donor appreciation dinner, and I was the technician assigned to manage the slide presentations and the microphone handoffs during the speeches. Lily is organized and thoughtful and very invested in her work and in maintaining her reputation within the nonprofit community, and she has a close circle of friends from college who still meet regularly for dinners and girls' nights and group texts that seem to operate as a kind of informal advisory board for everyone's life decisions. One of those friends is a woman named Flynn, who works as an influencer manager, which means she helps people build their social media presence and negotiate brand partnerships and generally control the narratives that the public sees about her clients. And Kara has always struck me as someone who is extremely comfortable wielding social pressure and manipulating group dynamics to get the outcomes she wants. Kara is engaged to a man named Tate, who works as a vendor liaison for a company that provides event services and catering coordination and venue access management. And I've run into Derek a few times at various events where both our companies were contracted to provide services, though we have never had more than brief professional exchanges about schedule coordination and equipment logistics. The night that everything started to shift in a way that I could not ignore was 3 weeks ago, when I was working a charity gala at one of the larger venues downtown that my company manages, and I had arrived 2 hours before the event was scheduled to begin in order to set up the audio-visual equipment for the evening's program, which included a silent auction display that needed multiple monitors, running synchronized slideshows, and a main stage area where several speakers and award recipients would be giving remarks throughout the night. The venue manager had requested a last-minute change to the monitor placement because the catering team needed better access to the buffet tables along the east wall, which meant I had to relocate one of my projection screens and its corresponding equipment cart to a position near the main entrance where I would have a clear sight line to both the coat check area and the front doors. Lily had told me earlier that week that she would not be attending this particular gala because she had a family dinner obligation with her parents and her younger sibling that had been scheduled months in advance, and that she could not reschedule without causing offense, and I had not thought anything of it because our work schedules often meant we attended events separately, and it was not unusual for her to have commitments that did not include me. I was adjusting the angle of the projection screen and testing the focus of the image when the first guests started arriving around 6:30 in the evening, and I was running through my mental checklist of equipment tests and backup plans when I saw Lily walk through the front entrance wearing a dress I had not seen before and carrying a small clutch purse that matched the formal tone of the event. What made me pause and really focus my attention on her arrival was the fact that she was not alone and she was not with her family, but rather she was walking in step with Tate, who was also dressed in formal attire and who was wearing one of the vendor badge lanyards that indicated he was working the event in some professional capacity. And the two of them were engaged in what appeared to be an easy, familiar conversation as they approached the registration table where the event staff were checking names against the guest list and distributing bid numbers for the silent auction. I stayed at my equipment station near the entrance and continued making small adjustments to the monitor displays while keeping Lily and Derek in my peripheral vision, and I watched as they both received their credentials and then moved together toward the main ballroom rather than splitting up to network separately the way colleagues normally would at an event like this. The venue layout meant that I had to move between the entrance area and the main ballroom several times during the early part of the evening to check speaker microphone levels and to confirm that the stage lighting was properly coordinated with the program schedule, and each time I passed through the ballroom, I noticed that Lily and Derek were still together and were standing close to each other in a way that suggested comfort and familiarity rather than the polite distance of casual work acquaintances. I also noticed that Lily did not appear to be networking with the other nonprofit coordinators who were present at the event and who I knew she typically made a point of greeting and catching up with at these kinds of professional gatherings, and instead she seemed entirely focused on her conversation with Derek and on whatever private exchange they were engaged in. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, I was adjusting one of the lapel microphones for a speaker who was preparing to give remarks from the stage when I happened to glance toward the coat check area, and I saw Lily and Derek standing very close together near the hallway that led to the venue's side exit. And they appeared to be having an intense, quiet conversation where Lily was looking down at her phone and Derek was leaning in close to see the screen over her shoulder. I finished securing the microphone and made my way back to my primary equipment station near the entrance because the program was about to resume and I needed to be ready to advance the slides for the next presentation, and as I was checking my tablet to confirm the slide sequence, I saw Lily and Derek walk past me toward the front doors, moving with the purposeful pace of people who were leaving together rather than simply stepping out for air. My cousin Jesse, who works as a bartender for the venue's catering company, was stationed at the bar near the entrance, and he happened to be looking in my direction at the exact moment that Lily and Derek passed through the doorway, and Jesse caught my eye, and there was a brief flicker of recognition and question in his expression before he had to turn back to fill a drink order for one of the guests. I did not have time to process what I had just witnessed because the program was starting again, and I needed to focus on my responsibilities, but I made a mental note of the time, which was 8:47 in the evening, according to the timestamp on my equipment tablet, and I filed away the image of Lily and Derek leaving together through the front entrance while the event was still in full progress. After the gala ended around 10:30 and the guests had mostly cleared out, I spent another hour breaking down equipment and loading cases into my work van, which was parked on the street outside the venue's main entrance. And while I was securing the last of the monitor cases in the back of the van, I remembered that I had a dash cam mounted on my windshield that runs continuously whenever the vehicle is parked and that automatically saves footage in 15-minute segments. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled up the dash cam's review interface on the small screen mounted near my rearview mirror, and I scrolled back to the 8:45 time marker to see what the camera had captured during the window when I had seen Lily and Derek leaving the venue. The angle of the dash cam was not perfect because it was primarily positioned to record traffic incidents and parking disputes rather than to document who was entering or exiting the building across the street. But the camera's wide field of view had indeed captured the front entrance of the venue, and I could clearly see two figures who matched Lily's and Derek's builds and clothing, walking out of the building together and then standing on the sidewalk for approximately 2 minutes engaged in conversation before they both walked off frame, heading in the direction of the parking structure that served the venue and the surrounding businesses. I used the dashcam's export function to save that particular 15-minute segment to a backup folder on the camera's memory card, and then I took out my phone and used its camera to photograph the dashcam screen, showing the still frame image of Lily and Derek exiting the venue with the timestamp clearly visible in the corner of the frame. I drove home that night feeling a strange mixture of detachment and calculation, because my first instinct was not anger or confrontation, but rather a kind of methodical curiosity about what exactly I had witnessed and what it meant in the context of Lily's earlier statement that she would not be attending the gala because of a family dinner obligation that she could not reschedule. When I arrived at the apartment that Lily and I shared, I found that she was not yet home, which was not particularly unusual, given that family dinners at her parents' house sometimes ran late, especially when her younger sibling was visiting from college, and I changed out of my work clothes and sat down at the small desk in the corner of our living room where I kept my laptop and my personal files organized in a way that reflected the systematic thinking that my job required when managing complex event logistics and equipment inventories. I created a new folder on my laptop labeled simply with the current month and year, and I transferred the dashcam still frame photograph from my phone to the laptop and saved it with a file name that included the date and the location and a brief description of what the image showed. I then opened a blank document and began creating a simple timeline starting with today's date and the gala event and noting the key facts that I could verify, which included the time that Lily had told me she would be at her family's dinner, the time that I had seen her arrive at the gala with Derek, the time that they had left together, and the timestamp on the dashcam footage that corroborated my direct observation. I did not include any speculation or emotional interpretation in this timeline because I had learned from my work that the most effective way to identify inconsistencies and patterns was to start with objective documented facts and to let the contradictions reveal themselves through simple chronological comparison. Lily came home around 11:30 that night, and she seemed relaxed and in good spirits, and she asked me how the gala had gone, and whether there had been any technical issues with the equipment or the program schedule, and I told her that everything had run smoothly and that the client had been pleased with the setup and the execution. She mentioned that her family dinner had been nice but had run longer than expected because her father had wanted to have an extended conversation about some home repair project he was considering, and she did not offer any details that would have allowed me to verify the timing or the specific location of this dinner. I did not ask any follow-up questions or mention that I had seen her at the venue because I wanted to observe whether she would volunteer any correction to her story or whether she would continue to maintain the narrative that she had been with her family all evening. And when she simply kissed me goodnight and went to take a shower before bed, I understood that she had made the choice to let the lie stand unchallenged. The following morning, I woke up before Lily and made coffee in the quiet stillness of the apartment. While my mind worked through the careful steps I needed to take in order to understand the full scope of what I had witnessed at the gala. And I knew from my professional experience managing complex event logistics that the most critical mistakes people make when they discover an inconsistency is to react immediately based on incomplete information rather than taking the time to gather additional data points that would either confirm or refute the initial observation. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and reviewed the timeline document I had started the night before, and I began thinking about what other sources of verification might exist that would help me establish whether Lily's presence at the gala with Derek was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of behavior that I had simply failed to notice because I had not been looking for it. Lily and I shared a calendar application on our phones that we used to coordinate our work schedules and our personal commitments and our various social obligations. And while I generally did not scrutinize her entries with any particular suspicion, I realized that I had never actually cross-referenced her stated plans against any external verification to confirm that she was where she said she would be at any given time. I opened the shared calendar on my phone and scrolled back through the previous month looking at the entries that Lily had created for herself, and I noticed that there were several recurring appointments labeled with vague descriptions like vendor coordination meeting and nonprofit planning session that did not include any specific location details or any indication of which vendors or which aspects of nonprofit planning were actually involved. I knew from my own work in the event industry that vendor coordination meetings were a normal part of Lily's job responsibilities and that she frequently needed to meet with caterers and venue managers and equipment suppliers to discuss logistics for upcoming fundraising events. But I also knew that these meetings typically happened during standard business hours and were usually documented with more specific details about which vendor company was involved and what particular event was being planned. The entries on our shared calendar that caught my attention were the ones that appeared in the evening time slots between 6 and 9 p.m., and that seemed to recur with a regular pattern every week or every other week over the past 2 months. And when I cross-referenced the dates of these evening vendor coordination entries against my own work schedule, I realized that several of them had occurred on nights when I had been working events at various venues around the city and would not have been home to observe when Lily actually left the apartment or when she returned. I decided that I needed to have a conversation with my cousin Jesse, who had been working as a bartender at the gala venue and who had made that brief eye contact with me when Lily and Derek had walked past us toward the exit. And I sent Jesse a text message asking if he had time to meet for coffee sometime over the next few days because I wanted to ask him about something I had observed at the event. Jesse replied within an hour, saying that he had a break between his lunch shift and his dinner shift the following day, and that he could meet me at a coffee shop that was roughly halfway between his apartment and mine. And I confirmed the time and the location, and then spent the rest of that day working a corporate conference setup, while my mind continued to turn over the question of how to approach Jesse without seeming like I was asking him to take sides in what might turn out to be a complicated family situation. The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early and ordered a black coffee and sat at a table near the window where I could see Jesse approaching from the street. And when he walked in and spotted me, he had the slightly cautious expression of someone who suspects that the conversation they are about to have is not going to be casual or comfortable. Jesse is 24 years old and has been working in the service industry since he was old enough to get a work permit, and he has the particular kind of social intelligence that comes from spending years observing people in situations where they think they are not being watched because they assume the bartender or the server is just part of the background furniture rather than a human being who notices patterns and remembers faces. Jesse sat down across from me with his own coffee, and after we had exchanged the usual pleasantries about work schedules and family news, I told him directly that I wanted to ask him about something I had seen at the charity gala 2 nights ago, and that I needed him to be honest with me even if he thought the information might be uncomfortable or might create problems. Jesse's expression became more guarded, and he asked me what specifically I was referring to, and I described seeing Lily arrive at the gala with Derek Tate, and then seeing them leave together through the front entrance around 8:47 in the evening, and I asked Jesse if he had noticed them at the event or if he had observed anything about their interaction that seemed noteworthy. Jesse was quiet for a moment, and then he said that yes, he had noticed Lily at the gala, and that he had been surprised to see her there because he knew from family conversations that she had told people she was going to be at a family dinner that night. And he also said that he had noticed she seemed to be spending most of the evening with Derek, and that their body language had struck him as more familiar and comfortable than what you would normally see between casual work colleagues. I asked Jesse if he had seen Lily and Derek together at any other events where he had been working, and Jesse hesitated again before admitting that yes, he had seen them together at least 2 other venues over the past month, and that on one of those occasions they had been sitting together at the bar during a quiet moment in the evening and had seemed to be having an intense private conversation that they had broken off abruptly when other guests had approached. I told Jesse that I appreciated his honesty and that I was not asking him to get involved in any confrontation or to take sides in whatever situation might be developing, but that I needed to understand the scope of what was happening before I decided how to address it with Lily. Jesse asked me if I was planning to confront her immediately, and I explained that no, I wanted to gather more information first because I had learned from my work that premature reactions based on incomplete evidence often made situations worse rather than better, and that I wanted to be certain about what I was dealing with before I took any action that could not be undone. Jesse nodded, and then he said something that surprised me, which was that he would be willing to write down a brief factual statement about what he had observed at the venues where he had seen Lily and Derek together, and that he would sign and date that statement so that I would have documentation from a neutral witness if I eventually needed it. I accepted Jesse's offer, and we sat there in the coffee shop while he took out a piece of paper from his backpack and wrote 3 sentences describing the dates and locations where he had seen Lily and Derek together, and noting that their behavior had appeared to be more than casual professional interaction. And then he signed his name and wrote the current date at the bottom of the page. I photographed the statement with my phone and then folded the original paper and put it in my wallet. And I thanked Jesse again and told him that I would keep him updated about how the situation developed, but that I did not expect him to be involved beyond providing this initial witness information. After Jesse left to go to his dinner shift, I sat alone in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes reviewing the information I had gathered over the past 2 days, and I realized that I now had 3 separate data points that all pointed toward the conclusion that Lily had been spending time with Derek Tate in contexts that she had deliberately concealed from me by providing false information about her whereabouts. The first data point was my direct observation of them at the charity gala supported by the dashcam footage that documented their departure together. The second data point was Jesse's neutral witness statement confirming multiple sightings at different venues over the past month. And the third data point was the pattern of vague evening appointments on our shared calendar that had no verifiable details, and that occurred with suspicious regularity. I returned to our apartment that evening before Lily got home from her office, and I sat down at my laptop and added Jesse's witness statement to the evidence folder I had created, and I also opened our shared calendar application and used the export function to save a PDF copy of the past 3 months of Lily's schedule entries so that I would have a permanent record that could not be altered or deleted if she later tried to claim that those appointments had never existed or had been entered incorrectly. I was in the middle of organizing these files when I received a notification on my phone from the lease management company that handled our apartment building. And the notification was an automated email confirming that our joint lease renewal application had been processed and approved, and that both Lily and I were now legally bound to another 12-month term, beginning on the 1st of next month with the same rent amount and the same conditions that had been in our original lease agreement. I opened the email and read through the details carefully because I had a vague memory of Lily mentioning something about the lease renewal a few weeks ago, but I had been distracted with a particularly complex venue setup project at work and had not paid close attention to the timeline or the specific paperwork requirements. The email included a link to a PDF document showing the signed renewal agreement, and when I opened that document, I could see both my digital signature and Lily's digital signature, along with the date stamps indicating when each of us had completed the electronic signing process through the lease management portal. According to the timestamps, Lily had signed the renewal 4 days ago, and I had signed it the same day after receiving an automated reminder email that I had responded to during a lunch break without really thinking through the implications. And the lease management company had processed both signatures and had generated this confirmation notice indicating that the renewal was now legally binding on both parties. I took a screenshot of the email subject line, which read, "Joint lease renewal confirmation, binding agreement effective," along with the date and the lease management company's logo, and I saved that screenshot to my evidence folder because something about the timing felt significant, in a way that I could not quite articulate yet, but that my instinct told me would become relevant as I continued to piece together what was actually happening. I was about to close my laptop when I remembered something that Lily's mother had said during the family dinner we had attended together about 10 days ago, which was a casual comment about how Lily's friend Kara had called to ask whether Lily was flexible about potentially relocating for career advancement opportunities in the coming year. At the time, I had not thought much about that comment because Lily's mother had framed it as just friendly advice and career planning, and Lily herself had brushed off the question by saying that Kara was always thinking about big-picture life strategy and that it was just her way of being supportive. But now, as I sat looking at the lease renewal confirmation that bound both Lily and me to this apartment for another 12 months, I began to wonder why Kara would be asking Lily's family about relocation flexibility at the exact same time that Lily was signing a binding lease agreement that would make relocation significantly more complicated and expensive. I opened a new tab on my laptop and navigated to the lease management company's website to review the terms and conditions section, and I confirmed what I already suspected, which was that breaking a lease early would require either mutual agreement from both signers or a significant financial penalty in the form of forfeited deposits and multiple months of rent paid as a termination fee. I called my brother Tom, who works as a real estate agent and who has a much better understanding of lease agreements and tenant law than I do, and I asked him in general terms about what obligations and complications would be involved if one person on a joint lease wanted to relocate but the other person wanted to stay in place. Tom explained that joint leases are designed specifically to protect landlords from situations where one tenant wants to leave and the other cannot afford the rent alone, and that both signers are equally responsible for the full lease term unless they can either find a replacement tenant who is approved by the landlord or negotiate a buyout agreement that compensates the landlord and the remaining tenant for the disruption and the financial risk. Tom asked me if I was planning to move, or if Lily was planning to move, and I told him that I was just trying to understand the theoretical options because someone had asked Lily about relocating, and I wanted to know what that would actually mean in practical terms. Tom said that if Lily had signed a lease renewal just a few days ago, then any serious conversation about relocating would have to wait until that 12-month term was completed unless she was prepared to walk away from a substantial amount of money and potentially damage her rental history, and he added that it seemed strange for someone to inquire about relocation plans immediately after binding themselves to a long-term lease in a different location. After I finished the call with Tom, I sat at my laptop and added a new entry to my timeline document, noting the date of the lease renewal signatures and the date of Kara's phone call to Lily's mother, asking about relocation flexibility, and I highlighted the fact that these two events appeared to be happening in parallel rather than in logical sequence. I also made a note that I needed to learn more about Kara's role in Lily's life and decision-making because it was becoming increasingly clear that Kara had significant influence over how Lily thought about her career and her future plans, and I wanted to understand whether that influence was genuinely supportive or whether it was serving some other agenda that I had not yet identified. Lily came home around 7:30 that evening carrying takeout food from a Thai restaurant near her office, and she seemed tired, but in a generally pleasant mood as she unpacked the containers and asked me if I wanted to eat dinner together in front of the television while we watched something relaxing and undemanding. I agreed, and we settled onto the couch with our food, and she scrolled through streaming options until she found a nature documentary that neither of us had seen before, and while we ate and watched the program, I observed her carefully for any signs of stress or distraction or guilt, but she appeared to be completely comfortable and at ease, in a way that suggested she was either very good at compartmentalizing her behavior or genuinely did not believe that she was doing anything that required concealment or deception. About halfway through the documentary, Lily's phone buzzed with an incoming text message, and she glanced at the screen and smiled slightly before typing a brief response. And when I casually asked who was texting, she said it was just Kara checking in about plans for an upcoming girls' night that the friend group was trying to coordinate. I asked Lily what Kara did for work, because I realized that while I knew Kara was an influencer manager, I did not actually know very much about the specifics of her job or her clients or how she spent her professional time. And Lily explained that Kara worked with social media personalities and small business owners who wanted to build their online presence and negotiate brand partnerships and sponsorships. I asked Lily if Kara managed Derek's professional image or his company's social media presence, since I knew that Derek worked in the event vendor industry, where reputation and visibility were important factors in securing contracts. And Lily paused for a moment before saying that yes, Kara had helped Derek's company with some promotional strategy in the past, but that their main connection was that Kara and Derek were engaged to each other and had been planning their wedding for some time next year. This was information that I had known in a vague background way, but had never really thought about carefully. And now I realized that Derek was not just some random coworker that Lily happened to be spending time with at various events, but was actually the fiancé of one of her closest friends and someone who would presumably be a permanent part of Lily's social circle for the foreseeable future. I kept my expression neutral and simply nodded, as though this was just casual conversation, and then I asked Lily how long Kara and Derek had been engaged, and she said they had gotten engaged about 8 months ago, and were planning a fairly large wedding for next autumn, with the kind of detailed vendor coordination and venue management that would require significant advanced planning and negotiation. I filed away this timeline in my mind because it meant that Kara and Derek's engagement had been established and public for several months, before the pattern of Lily's evening appointments and venue appearances with Derek had begun, and I wondered whether Kara was aware that her fiancé was spending significant amounts of time with Lily in contexts that appeared to go beyond normal professional collaboration. The next day at work, I had some downtime between event setups, and I used that opportunity to do some casual research on Derek's company and its reputation within the event vendor industry. And what I found was that Derek worked for a mid-sized vendor services firm that provided catering coordination and venue access management and equipment rental services to corporate and nonprofit clients across the city. I also found several industry forum discussions where venue managers and event planners had posted warnings about Derek's company being flagged for overbilling and for requesting inappropriate kickback arrangements in exchange for preferential vendor placement at high-profile events. And there was one particularly detailed post from about 18 months ago where a venue manager described having to terminate Derek's company's contract because of documented ethics violations related to undisclosed financial relationships with nonprofit clients who were supposed to be receiving competitive vendor bids rather than predetermined partnerships. I took screenshots of these forum discussions and saved them to my evidence folder not because they directly proved anything about Derek's relationship with Lily, but because they established a pattern of questionable professional behavior that suggested Derek might be someone who was willing to use personal relationships and informal connections to gain advantages that he could not obtain through legitimate competitive processes. I also made a note to myself that I should check with my own company's vendor management team to see if Derek's firm was on any kind of restricted or flagged list that would prevent us from working with them at our venues. And I suspected, based on the forum discussions I had read, that there might be internal documentation about concerns or complaints that had been raised by venue staff or event clients. That evening, I decided to attend a family dinner at Lily's parents' house that had been scheduled for several weeks, and I was particularly interested in observing how Lily interacted with her family and whether there were any signs that she had shared information with them about changes or plans or concerns that she had not discussed with me. We arrived at her parents' house around 6 o'clock and were greeted by Lily's mother, who immediately started asking about wedding planning and about whether we had given any thought to when we might want to start thinking seriously about engagement and marriage timelines, and Lily deflected these questions with the same practiced ease that she always used when her mother brought up this topic. During dinner, Lily's father asked me about my work and whether I was still enjoying the event production industry or whether I had any interest in pursuing different career paths, and I explained that I found the work engaging because it required both technical problem-solving skills and the ability to anticipate and manage complex logistical challenges in real-time high-pressure environments. Lily's younger sibling, who was home from college for a long weekend, asked Lily about her nonprofit work and whether she was still working with the same vendors and partners that she had mentioned during previous family conversations, and Lily said that yes, she was continuing to work with several established vendor relationships, but that she was also exploring some new partnership opportunities that might lead to more visibility and career advancement within the nonprofit fundraising world. Lily's mother then mentioned almost casually that Lily's friend Kara had called her the previous week to ask whether Lily had ever expressed any interest in relocating to a different city for work opportunities. And Lily's mother said she had told Kara that as far as she knew, Lily was very happy here and had just renewed her apartment lease and seemed settled in her current position. Lily's mother then mentioned almost casually that Lily's friend Kara had called her the previous week to ask whether Lily had ever expressed any interest in relocating to a different city for work opportunities, and Lily's mother said she had told Kara that as far as she knew, Lily was very happy here and had just renewed her apartment lease and seemed settled in her current position. I watched Lily's face carefully as her mother recounted this conversation, and I saw a brief flicker of surprise or confusion cross her expression before she recovered and said that Kara was always thinking ahead about career trajectories and long-term planning, and that she probably had just been asking in a general theoretical way rather than suggesting any specific immediate relocation plans. Lily's father interjected at that point and said that he had been under the impression that Lily and I had both signed the lease renewal together just last week, and that it seemed odd for someone to be asking about relocation possibilities at the exact moment when we were committing to another year in our current apartment. And Lily agreed with her father and said that yes, we had both signed the renewal and that Kara must have been thinking about longer-term possibilities beyond the next 12 months rather than suggesting anything that would happen in the immediate future. I found this exchange interesting because Lily's explanation seemed plausible on the surface but did not actually address the underlying question of why Kara would be gathering information about Lily's flexibility and openness to relocation without apparently discussing those questions directly with Lily herself first. After dinner, Lily and I helped clear the table and wash dishes while her parents moved to the living room to watch the evening news, and Lily's younger sibling took the opportunity to pull me aside in the hallway and say quietly that she thought Kara had been acting weird lately and had been much more involved in Lily's life decisions than seemed normal even for a close friend. I asked what specifically had seemed weird, and Lily's sibling said that Kara had been texting Lily constantly over the past few weeks and had been very insistent about Lily attending certain social events and friend gatherings even when Lily had said she was tired or had other commitments, and that there was something about Kara's tone and her level of control over the friend group's activities that felt uncomfortable and manipulative. I thanked Lily's sibling for sharing that observation, and I said that I had noticed some similar patterns but had not been sure whether I was reading too much into normal friend dynamics. And Lily's sibling said that no, this was definitely not normal, and that several of Lily's other friends had also commented privately about how Kara seemed to be turning every casual social gathering into some kind of strategic planning session or loyalty test. I filed away this information as another data point that suggested Kara's involvement in Lily's life was not just supportive friendship, but rather something more calculated and agenda-driven. And I made a mental note to pay closer attention to how Kara communicated with Lily and what kinds of influence she appeared to be exerting over Lily's decisions and priorities. On the drive home from her parents' house, I asked Lily in what I hoped was a casual, conversational tone why Kara would have been calling her mother to ask about relocation possibilities, and Lily said that she honestly did not know, and that Kara had not mentioned anything to her about relocating, and that maybe Kara was thinking about her own career moves and was trying to gauge whether any of her friends would be interested in making similar changes. I pointed out that if Kara was thinking about her own relocation plans, it would make more sense for her to discuss those plans with her fiancé Derek first, before polling her friends' families about their flexibility. And Lily was quiet for a moment before saying that maybe Kara and Derek were considering relocating together as a couple, and Kara was trying to understand what that would mean for their social circle and their friend relationships. This explanation also seemed plausible on the surface, but it raised additional questions in my mind about why a couple planning to relocate together would need to assess their friends' willingness to also relocate rather than simply accepting that friendships would continue long distance or would naturally drift apart as people moved to different cities. I decided not to push the conversation any further at that moment because I did not want to signal to Lily that I was scrutinizing her explanations or that I had any particular suspicion about what might be motivating Kara's questions, and instead I simply agreed that it was probably just Kara's way of thinking ahead about life changes and transitions that might affect the friend group dynamics. The following afternoon, I was at work setting up equipment for a corporate training seminar when I received a text message from the lease management office saying that they had received an inquiry from someone asking about the procedures and penalties for breaking a joint lease agreement early, and the message said that they wanted to confirm with both leaseholders before providing detailed information to third parties about our specific lease terms and conditions. I immediately called the lease management office and spoke to the receptionist who handled tenant inquiries, and I asked who had called asking about our lease and whether they had identified themselves and explained why they were seeking that information. The receptionist checked her call log and said that the inquiry had come from a woman named Kara Flynn, who had identified herself as a close friend of Lily's, and had said that she was helping Lily explore her options regarding a potential career opportunity that might require relocation, and the receptionist had told Kara that she could not provide specific details about lease terms to anyone who was not listed as a leaseholder, but that the general policy was that early termination of a joint lease required either mutual agreement from both parties or payment of a termination fee equivalent to 3 months' rent plus forfeiture of the security deposit. I thanked the receptionist for checking with me before providing our specific information to a third party, and I confirmed that I had not authorized anyone to inquire about our lease on my behalf, and the receptionist said she would make a note in our file that any future inquiries should be directed to the leaseholders directly rather than being discussed with friends or family members. I hung up the phone and sat in my work van for several minutes processing this new information and trying to understand what it meant that Kara had taken it upon herself to call our lease management office to inquire about early termination procedures, without apparently discussing this with Lily first, or certainly without discussing it with me at all. The timing was particularly striking because Kara's call to the lease office had occurred after Lily and I had both signed the renewal agreement, which meant that Kara was not trying to prevent us from renewing the lease, but rather was trying to understand how we could get out of a lease that had already been renewed and made binding. This suggested that either Kara had some plan or expectation that Lily would need to relocate in the near future, despite having just committed to another 12 months in our current apartment, or that Kara was deliberately trying to create a situation where Lily would feel pressure to break the lease and would be willing to pay the financial penalties in order to pursue some opportunity that Kara was promoting. I added this information to my evidence timeline, and I took a photograph of the text message from the lease office as documentation of Kara's inquiry, and I began to develop a working hypothesis that Kara's interest in Lily's relocation flexibility might be connected to the pattern of Lily's evening appointments and venue appearances with Derek. If Derek and Kara were indeed planning to relocate together, as Lily had suggested during our drive home from dinner, then it would make sense for Kara to want to remove any complications or entanglements that might make Derek's departure from the city more difficult or more likely to be discovered and questioned. Lily's presence in the same city where Derek worked and where their professional relationship could be observed by mutual colleagues and family members like Jesse represented a potential risk to Kara's relationship with Derek. And removing that risk by encouraging or pressuring Lily to relocate would be one way for Kara to maintain control over the situation. I spent the next several days continuing to work my regular event production schedule while also monitoring our shared calendar and paying closer attention to the patterns of when Lily said she would be home versus when she actually arrived, and whether her explanations for delays or changes in plans were consistent with what I could independently verify through timestamps and location details. I noticed that on 2 occasions over the following week, Lily had calendar entries labeled as nonprofit planning sessions that were scheduled for early evening time slots. And on both of those occasions, she had sent me text messages saying that the meetings were running longer than expected and that she would be home later than originally planned. On the second of those 2 occasions, I happened to be driving past one of the venues where my company frequently worked and where I knew Derek's vendor services company also had an active contract. And on an impulse, I pulled into the parking lot and drove slowly through the rows of parked cars looking for Lily's distinctive blue sedan with the nonprofit organization's parking permit visible in the windshield. I found her car parked near the back entrance of the venue in an area that was typically used by vendor staff rather than by event attendees or nonprofit coordinators who would normally park in the main lot near the front entrance. And I noted the time and the location and took a photograph of her car with my phone, showing the parking permit and the distinctive bumper sticker that made the vehicle unmistakably hers. I did not approach the venue or try to verify whether Lily was actually inside or whether Derek was also present because I did not want to risk being seen and having to explain why I was checking up on her location, and instead I simply drove home and added this observation to my evidence file as another data point that suggested Lily's stated nonprofit meetings might actually be occasions when she was meeting with Derek in contexts that she preferred to keep separate from her official calendar descriptions and her explanations to me. The fact that her car was parked in the vendor area rather than the client area suggested that she was either trying to be less visible to other nonprofit professionals who might recognize her vehicle, or that she was meeting Derek in his capacity as a vendor liaison rather than attending a legitimate nonprofit planning session that would have involved multiple organizations and coordinators. That weekend, Lily mentioned that her friend group was planning a girls' night gathering at Maya's apartment and that she would probably be out until late because they were planning to watch movies and catch up on everyone's news and relationship updates, and she asked if I minded having the apartment to myself for the evening. I said that I did not mind and that I had some equipment maintenance work I needed to catch up on anyway, and Lily seemed pleased that I was being flexible and understanding about her social plans. After she left for Maya's apartment, I sat down at my laptop and reviewed all of the evidence I had compiled over the past 2.5 weeks, and I began to create a more comprehensive timeline that showed not just the individual incidents and observations, but also the pattern of behavior and the connections between different pieces of information that had initially seemed unrelated. What emerged from this timeline review was a picture of systematic deception that appeared to involve not just Lily and Derek, but also Kara, as someone who was actively working to manage and control the situation in ways that served her own interests or protected her relationship with Derek from exposure or complication. I realized that I needed more information about what was actually happening during the girls' night gatherings and whether those gatherings were genuine social events or whether they were being used by Kara as opportunities to influence Lily's thinking or to coordinate alibis and cover stories that would make it harder for anyone to identify inconsistencies in the explanations that Lily was providing about her schedule and her whereabouts. I was considering how I might be able to gather that additional information without directly confronting anyone or revealing my suspicions when my phone buzzed with a notification, and when I looked at the screen, I saw that I had received a voicemail from Maya's number, even though I had not heard my phone ring or seen any indication of an incoming call. I was considering how I might be able to gather that additional information without directly confronting anyone or revealing my suspicions when my phone buzzed with a notification. And when I looked at the screen, I saw that I had received a voicemail from Maya's number, even though I had not heard my phone ring or seen any indication of an incoming call. I opened the voicemail application and saw that the message had been left approximately 15 minutes ago, and that the duration was 3 minutes and 27 seconds, which was unusually long for what would normally be a brief message or a butt dial recording that captured only ambient noise and muffled background conversation. I pressed play on the voicemail and immediately recognized that this was indeed an accidental pocket dial or purse dial situation, where Maya's phone had somehow activated the call function without her knowledge and had recorded whatever conversation was happening in the room at that moment. And as I listened carefully, I could hear multiple female voices engaged in what sounded like an intense planning discussion, rather than the casual, relaxed conversation that you would expect from a typical girls' night gathering. The audio quality was poor, because the phone was clearly muffled by fabric or buried in a bag, but I could make out enough words and phrases to understand that the group was discussing some kind of coordinated plan that involved Lily and some kind of test or confrontation that they wanted to stage. I listened to the entire recording twice and then a third time while taking notes about the specific phrases and voice patterns that I could identify with reasonable certainty, and what I pieced together from those 3 careful listens was that Kara was leading a discussion about testing my reaction to a staged breakup scenario where Lily would deliver some kind of scripted statement about ending our relationship to see whether I would become emotional or angry or defensive. Kara's voice was the most distinct and the most assertive in the recording, and I could hear her saying something about how they needed to know whether I was capable of hiding my true nature or whether I would reveal myself to be controlling or manipulative when faced with the loss of the relationship. Another voice that I thought might be Maya's was asking whether this was really necessary and whether it might cause more harm than good if the test went wrong, or if I reacted in a way that escalated the situation beyond what they were prepared to handle. And Kara's response was that it was better to know now what kind of person I really was, rather than waiting until Lily was more deeply committed or until there were more significant life decisions at stake. I could hear Lily's voice at one point saying something that sounded uncertain or hesitant about whether she was comfortable with this level of manipulation and staging, and Kara's voice cutting in sharply to say that this was not manipulation, but rather a legitimate way to reveal truth that someone might be hiding behind a calm exterior that was too controlled to be genuine. The most significant piece of information that I extracted from the voicemail recording came near the end, when Kara's voice said something about the screenshots that she was going to send to the group chat that would provide the justification for why Lily needed to confront me and why the test breakup scenario would seem believable rather than arbitrary. And Kara said that the screenshots would show messages that I had supposedly sent to another woman, and that this evidence would give Lily the moral high ground and would make it impossible for me to deflect or avoid accountability when she delivered the scripted breakup lines. The fact that Kara was planning to fabricate screenshot evidence of messages that I had never sent and that did not exist was a significant revelation, because it meant that this was not just a psychological test, but rather an elaborate setup that involved creating false evidence to support a predetermined narrative about my character and my behavior. I saved the voicemail recording to my laptop and created a backup copy on a separate storage device because I recognized that this audio file was potentially the most important piece of evidence I had collected so far, and it demonstrated clearly that Kara was actively manipulating the situation and was willing to manufacture false evidence in order to create a scenario that would allow her to control the outcome and the narrative. I also noted the timestamp of when the voicemail had been received because that would allow me to establish that this planning conversation had occurred during the supposed girls' night gathering and would corroborate my suspicion that these social events were being used for purposes that went beyond simple friendship and support. I spent the next hour reviewing all of my evidence files and organizing them into a coherent sequence that would allow me to present a clear, factual timeline if and when I needed to confront Lily or defend myself against whatever false accusations Kara was planning to manufacture through her fabricated screenshots. I created a simple one-page document that listed the key dates and events in chronological order, starting with the charity gala where I had first observed Lily and Derek leaving together, continuing through Jesse's witness statement and the multiple calendar conflicts and the lease renewal circumstances and Kara's inquiry about breaking the lease, and ending with the voicemail recording that documented Kara's plan to stage a test breakup using false evidence. I printed this one-page timeline, and I also printed the most important supporting documents, including the dash cam still frame showing Lily and Derek leaving the gala venue, Jesse's signed witness statement, the screenshot of the lease office text message about Kara's inquiry, and a transcript I had created of the key phrases from the voicemail recording. I put all of these documents into a clear plastic folder with labeled tabs so that I could quickly access any specific piece of evidence if I needed to reference it during a conversation or confrontation, and I placed the folder in my laptop bag where it would be readily available but not obviously visible unless I chose to produce it. The question that I had to answer for myself at this point was whether I should confront Lily immediately about what I had discovered or whether I should allow the staged test breakup scenario to proceed as Kara had planned, and use that event as an opportunity to expose not just the false screenshot evidence, but also the larger pattern of manipulation and deception that I had been documenting over the past several weeks. My instinct, based on my professional experience managing complex event logistics, was that it was almost always better to let a flawed plan proceed to its execution rather than trying to prevent it preemptively, because the moment of execution was when all the weaknesses and contradictions and false assumptions became visible and undeniable to everyone involved, rather than remaining theoretical possibilities that could be explained away or dismissed. I decided that I would allow Kara's test breakup plan to proceed, and that I would attend whatever confrontation or gathering they were planning with the full knowledge of what they intended to do, and with my evidence folder ready to produce at the appropriate moment. And I recognized that this decision carried some risk, because there was always the possibility that the situation could escalate beyond my ability to control it, or that Lily might be so influenced by Kara's narrative that she would refuse to consider any alternative explanation or evidence that contradicted what she had been led to believe. However, I also believed that the potential benefit of exposing Kara's manipulation publicly in front of the friend group and forcing everyone to confront the fact that they had been participating in an elaborate deception based on manufactured evidence was worth the risk of temporary discomfort or conflict. Lily came home from Maya's apartment around midnight, looking tired, but also slightly agitated, in a way that suggested the evening had been more stressful than the casual movie night she had described when she left. And when I asked her if she had enjoyed the gathering, she gave a vague response about how it had been fine, but that there had been some intense conversations about relationships and trust that had left her feeling emotionally drained. I did not press for details because I did not want to signal that I knew anything about what had actually been discussed, and instead I simply said that I hoped she had been able to relax and decompress with her friends, and that I was glad she had a support system that she could turn to when she needed to talk through complicated feelings. The next day, I received a text message from Lily saying that her friends wanted to have an important conversation with me and that they were hoping I could come to Maya's apartment the following evening, around 7 o'clock, because there were some concerns that they wanted to discuss with both of us together. I responded saying that I would be there and asking if I needed to bring anything or prepare for any specific topics, and Lily replied saying that I should just come ready to listen and to be honest about some things that had come up recently. I recognized this as the setup for the staged test breakup that I had heard being planned in the accidental voicemail recording, and I confirmed that I would attend and that I appreciated her friends caring enough about our relationship to want to have this conversation. I spent that afternoon at work going through my normal equipment setup routines for a wedding reception while mentally rehearsing how I would respond when Kara presented her fabricated screenshot evidence and when Lily delivered whatever scripted breakup lines Kara had prepared for her. My plan was to remain completely calm and to respond with genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness or anger, and to allow them to fully commit to their accusations and their narrative before I produced any of my own evidence or challenged any of their claims. I knew from my work managing live events that the most effective way to expose a technical failure or a logistics breakdown was to let the problem manifest completely rather than trying to patch it or cover it over before it became visible to everyone in the room, and I intended to apply that same principle to this social confrontation. The following evening, I arrived at Maya's apartment at precisely 7 o'clock carrying my laptop bag, which contained the evidence folder I had prepared along with my laptop and some other work materials that would make the bag seem normal and unremarkable rather than suggesting that I had come prepared for a confrontation. I knocked on the door and Maya answered, looking uncomfortable and avoiding direct eye contact, and she gestured for me to come inside and said that everyone was already in the living room waiting. I walked into the living room and immediately assessed the scene, which had clearly been staged with deliberate attention to creating a specific power dynamic and emotional atmosphere. The furniture had been arranged so that there was a single armchair positioned opposite a couch, where 4 of Lily's friends were seated in a row like a panel of judges, and Lily was standing near the window with her back partially turned to the room in a posture that suggested she was distressed or conflicted. I recognized immediately that this setup was designed to make me feel isolated and outnumbered and to create a psychological pressure that would make most people defensive or emotional, and I made a conscious decision to subvert that dynamic by appearing completely relaxed and cooperative rather than resistant or hostile. I sat down in the armchair and placed my laptop bag on the floor beside me within easy reach, and I looked around at the faces of Lily's friends with an expression of calm curiosity and waited for someone to begin the conversation. Maya, who was apparently serving as the moderator or facilitator for this gathering, cleared her throat and said that they had asked me to come because there were some concerns about messages that I had allegedly sent to another woman, and that these messages had raised questions about my honesty and my respect for my relationship with Lily. I maintained my calm expression and said that I was not aware of any messages that would raise those kinds of concerns, and that I would be happy to address any specific questions or show them my actual message history if that would help clarify whatever confusion had arisen. I could see Kara shift forward on the couch, preparing to take control of the conversation, and I could see Lily still standing by the window with her shoulders tense and her hands gripping her phone. Maya, who was apparently serving as the moderator or facilitator for this gathering, cleared her throat and said that they had asked me to come because there were some concerns about messages that I had allegedly sent to another woman, and that these messages had raised questions about my honesty and my respect for my relationship with Lily. I maintained my calm expression and said that I was not aware of any messages that would raise those kinds of concerns, and that I would be happy to address any specific questions or show them my actual message history if that would help clarify whatever confusion had arisen. I could see Kara shift forward on the couch, preparing to take control of the conversation, and I could see Lily still standing by the window with her shoulders tense and her hands gripping her phone, as though she was holding on to something that gave her courage or justification for what she was about to do. Kara spoke up at that point and said that they were not here to debate whether the messages existed because she had already provided screenshots to the group that showed exactly what I had sent and to whom I had sent them, and that the purpose of this gathering was to give me an opportunity to take accountability for my actions and to explain why I had chosen to betray Lily's trust in such a blatant and disrespectful way. I nodded slowly, as though I was processing this information with genuine concern and confusion. And then I asked if someone could show me these screenshots, because I wanted to understand exactly what messages they were referring to, since I had no memory of sending anything that would constitute a betrayal or a violation of trust. There was a brief moment of hesitation, where I could see the friends exchanging glances with each other, as though they had not expected me to ask to see the evidence directly, and were uncertain about whether showing me the screenshots was part of the script that Kara had prepared for them. Kara recovered quickly and said that the screenshots were in the group chat and that Lily had already seen them and had been devastated by what they revealed, and that my request to see them now seemed like a manipulation tactic designed to buy time or to create doubt rather than a genuine attempt to understand what I had done wrong. I maintained my calm demeanor and said that I was not trying to manipulate anyone, but that I genuinely could not address accusations about messages that I had not seen and could not verify, and that if they wanted me to take accountability for something, then I needed to know specifically what that something was. Lily turned away from the window at that point and looked directly at me for the first time since I had entered the room, and her expression was a mixture of anger and hurt and something else that looked almost like uncertainty or confusion about whether she was doing the right thing. She said in a voice that sounded rehearsed and slightly robotic that she was done pretending that everything was fine and that she could not continue in a relationship with someone who had so little respect for her feelings and her boundaries, and that it was over between us, and that she hoped I would have the decency to accept her decision without making this any more difficult than it already was. I looked at Lily for a long moment, and then I smiled in what I hoped was a gentle, understanding way rather than a mocking or defensive way, and I said simply that if that was how she felt, then I agreed that it was probably for the best that we end things now rather than continuing in a relationship where she felt disrespected or where I had somehow failed to meet her expectations. The room went completely silent in a way that suggested this was not the response that anyone had been expecting, and I could see confusion and surprise register on multiple faces as they processed the fact that I had agreed immediately, rather than arguing or begging or becoming emotional in any of the ways that they had apparently anticipated. Kara was the first to break the silence, and she said with an edge of suspicion in her voice that my calm acceptance seemed too convenient and too controlled to be a genuine reaction to losing a 3-year relationship, and that she wanted to know what I was really thinking and feeling rather than watching me perform some kind of calculated, rational response. I turned my attention to Kara and maintained my calm expression as I said that I had always believed that people should be able to end relationships whenever they felt those relationships were no longer serving their needs or making them happy, and that I was not going to try to convince Lily to stay with me if she had decided that I was not the right partner for her. Lily spoke up again at that point and said something that immediately caught my full attention, which was her asking me in a tone that combined accusation with genuine question what I meant when I had mentioned messages in my earlier response to Maya's opening statement. I paused and looked at Lily with an expression of sincere confusion and said that I had simply been responding to what Maya had said about concerns regarding messages that I had supposedly sent to another woman, and that I had asked to see the screenshots that Kara had mentioned because I wanted to understand what specific messages were being referenced. Lily's face changed at that moment, and her expression shifted from rehearsed anger to genuine confusion, and she looked at Kara and said that she thought the screenshots showed messages that I had sent, not messages that I had been asked about. Kara's expression tightened, and she said quickly that Lily was confused about the phrasing, and that of course the screenshots showed messages that I had sent, and that Lily should not let me twist her words or create doubt about what she had clearly seen in the group chat. I watched this exchange with interest because it was becoming clear that there was a gap between what Kara had told the group about the nature of the evidence and what the evidence actually showed or claimed to show, and I recognized that this was the moment when the fabricated nature of Kara's setup was beginning to become visible to at least some of the people in the room. I reached down slowly and picked up my laptop bag from the floor beside my chair, and I placed it on my lap and opened the main compartment, and I said, in the same calm, conversational tone that I had been maintaining throughout this gathering, that perhaps it would be helpful if we could look at my actual phone and my actual message history so that we could clear up any confusion about what messages I had or had not sent. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and unlocked it with my fingerprint, and then I stood up and walked over to where Lily was standing, and I handed her the phone, and I said that she was welcome to scroll through my entire message history, with any contact she wanted to examine, and that I had nothing to hide and no deleted conversations that I was trying to conceal. Lily took the phone from my hand, and her fingers were shaking slightly as she opened the messaging application and began scrolling through the list of conversations and the individual message threads, and I could see her eyes moving rapidly across the screen as she searched for anything that would match the screenshots that Kara had supposedly sent to the group chat. After about 2 minutes of scrolling, Lily looked up at Kara with an expression that had shifted from confusion to something much closer to anger or betrayal, and she said that she could not find any messages that matched what Kara had shown the group, and that the message history on my phone did not contain any of the conversations that had been in the screenshots. Kara stood up from the couch at that point, and her posture had become defensive rather than accusatory. And she said that I must have deleted the incriminating messages before coming to this gathering, because I had obviously known that I was going to be confronted and had taken steps to cover my tracks. I remained standing calmly near Lily, and I pointed out that message applications kept records of deleted conversations, and that if Lily wanted to check the deleted messages folder, she would find that it was empty, and that there was no indication that anything had been removed from my message history in recent days or weeks. Maya spoke up from her position on the couch and said in a voice that sounded uncertain and uncomfortable that maybe they needed to take a step back and figure out what was actually going on here, and that it seemed like there was a significant discrepancy between the evidence that Kara had presented to the group and the evidence that was visible on my actual phone. One of the other friends, whose name I thought was Jessica, said that she wanted to see the screenshots again because she was starting to feel like maybe they had all made assumptions without really examining the images carefully, and she asked Kara to pull up the group chat and show everyone the screenshots side by side with my actual phone so they could compare the details. Kara's face had gone pale at this point, and she said that she did not think it was productive to turn this into an investigation or a trial, and that the point of this gathering had been to allow me to take accountability rather than to pick apart evidence and create doubt. I found this response interesting because it was the first clear indication that Kara was trying to prevent the group from examining the fabricated screenshots too closely, and I recognized that this was the moment when I needed to shift from defensive posture to offensive presentation of my own evidence. I walked back to my chair and reached into my laptop bag and pulled out the clear plastic folder that contained my timeline document and the supporting evidence that I had compiled over the past several weeks, and I placed the folder on the coffee table in the center of the room where everyone could see it, but where no one could immediately grab it or remove it from view. I said, in the same calm, measured tone that I had been using throughout the evening, that before we continued this conversation, I thought it would be helpful for everyone to understand the full context of what had been happening over the past few weeks, and that I had some information that I believed was relevant to understanding why this gathering had been organized and what its actual purpose was. Lily looked at the folder on the coffee table and then looked at me with an expression that combined curiosity with apprehension, and she asked what kind of information I was talking about and why I had brought documentation to what was supposed to be an informal conversation among friends. I explained that I had brought documentation because I had learned several days ago through an accidental voicemail message that this gathering was not actually an informal conversation, but rather a planned confrontation based on fabricated evidence, and that I had wanted to be prepared to present factual information that would allow everyone in the room to understand what was really happening and who was actually responsible for creating this situation. The room went completely silent again, and I could see multiple faces registering shock and confusion at my statement about the accidental voicemail message, and Maya's expression in particular showed a dawning recognition that suggested she was remembering the pocket dial incident and was beginning to understand that I had heard the planning conversation that had taken place during the girls' night gathering. Kara demanded to know what I was talking about and what voicemail I was referring to, and I explained that Maya's phone had accidentally called my number during the girls' night gathering, and had left a 3-minute recording of the conversation where Kara had described her plan to stage a test breakup using fabricated screenshots as evidence to justify the confrontation. I picked up the folder from the coffee table and opened it to the first page, which was the timeline document that I had created showing the dates and events in chronological order, and I asked if everyone was willing to look at this information with open minds and genuine curiosity about what the facts actually showed rather than relying on assumptions and manufactured narratives. Maya nodded slowly, and the other friends murmured their agreement, and even Kara seemed to recognize that she could not prevent this information from being presented without making herself look even more suspicious and controlling than she already appeared. I began walking through the timeline, starting with the charity gala on the first date, where I had observed Lily arriving at an event that she had told me she would not be attending because of a family dinner obligation, and I produced the dashcam still frame that showed Lily and Derek Tate leaving the venue together at 8:47 in the evening. Lily's face went pale as she looked at the photograph, and she started to say that it had been a work event and that Derek was a vendor partner. But I continued calmly to the next item on the timeline before she could fully form her explanation. I began walking through the timeline, starting with the charity gala on the first date where I had observed Lily arriving at an event that she had told me she would not be attending because of a family dinner obligation, and I produced the dashcam still frame that showed Lily and Derek Tate leaving the venue together at 8:47 in the evening. Lily's face went pale as she looked at the photograph, and she started to say that it had been a work event and that Derek was a vendor partner, but I continued calmly to the next item on the timeline before she could fully form her explanation or attempt to provide context that would make the discrepancy between her stated plans and her actual location seem innocent or coincidental. The next item on my timeline was Jesse's signed witness statement, which I produced from the folder and placed on the coffee table beside the dash cam photograph, and I explained that my cousin Jesse, who worked as a bartender at multiple venues around the city, had observed Lily and Derek together at 3 separate events over the course of the past month, and that Jesse had been willing to document what he had seen in a brief, factual statement that included dates and locations and a description of the body language and interaction patterns that had struck him as noteworthy. I could see Lily's hands starting to shake as she looked at Jesse's handwritten statement with his signature and the date clearly visible at the bottom of the page, and I could see her mind working to try to construct an explanation that would account for multiple sightings across different venues and different time periods, rather than a single isolated incident that could be dismissed as misunderstanding or coincidence. I moved on to the third item in my timeline, which was the documentation of the calendar conflicts between Lily's stated nonprofit planning sessions and the actual timing of events where Derek's vendor services company had been contracted to provide services, and I produced screenshots of our shared calendar showing the vague entries labeled as vendor coordination meetings that had consistently occurred during evening hours when legitimate business meetings would typically not be scheduled. I pointed out that I had cross-referenced these calendar entries with the public event schedules for the venues where Derek's company worked, and that there was a clear pattern of correlation between Lily's evening appointments and Derek's professional presence at those same venues on those same dates. Lily interrupted at that point and said in a voice that was becoming increasingly defensive and shrill that she had never claimed that her meetings with Derek were secret or inappropriate, and that vendor coordination was a legitimate part of her job responsibilities, and that I was twisting normal professional interactions into something suspicious through selective presentation of facts without proper context. I nodded as though I was considering her explanation seriously, and then I said that she was absolutely right, that vendor coordination was a normal part of her work, and that professional meetings with vendors were entirely appropriate, but that I was confused about why she had told me she was at a family dinner on the night of the charity gala when she was actually at a work event with Derek, and why her calendar entries for these vendor meetings were so vague and lacking in the kind of specific details that her other work appointments typically included. Maya spoke up at that point and asked Lily directly whether she had told me that she was going to be at a family dinner on the night of the gala, and Lily hesitated for several seconds before admitting that yes, she had said something about a family obligation, but that she must have gotten her dates confused or must have had to change her plans at the last minute when the work event became mandatory. I pointed out gently that the gala had been scheduled months in advance, and that Lily's nonprofit organization had been one of the partner sponsors, which meant she would have known about the event and would have known that her attendance might be expected, and that it seemed unlikely that she would have genuinely confused the date or would have only learned about the attendance requirement at the last minute. I returned to my timeline and moved to the fourth item, which was the documentation of the joint lease renewal that Lily and I had both signed just a few weeks ago, and I produced the screenshot of the lease management office email confirming that both of our signatures had been processed and that we were now legally bound to another 12 months in our current apartment. I then produced the text message from the lease management office notifying me that someone named Flynn had called asking about procedures and penalties for breaking a joint lease early, and I noted that this inquiry had occurred after the lease renewal had already been signed and made binding, rather than before the renewal, when such an inquiry might have made sense if someone was genuinely trying to help Lily evaluate her housing options. Every face in the room turned to look at Kara at that moment, and I could see the other friends beginning to understand that there was a level of manipulation and behind-the-scenes activity happening that they had not been aware of and had not consented to being part of. Kara's face had gone from pale to flushed, and she said that she had only called the lease office because she was trying to help Lily understand her options for career advancement opportunities that might require relocation, and that there was nothing sinister or manipulative about a friend trying to gather information that might be useful for long-term planning purposes. I acknowledged that Kara's explanation was plausible on its surface, but then I asked why Kara had felt the need to call Lily's mother to ask about Lily's willingness to relocate without apparently discussing these career opportunities with Lily first, or without mentioning to me that she was gathering information about breaking the lease that we had just renewed together. I could see Lily's expression shift again as she processed the fact that Kara had been making inquiries and having conversations about Lily's future plans with Lily's family and with the lease management office without keeping Lily fully informed about the scope and the nature of these activities. Maya asked Kara directly why she had been making all of these inquiries and arrangements without being more transparent with the full friend group about what she was trying to accomplish. And Kara's response was that she had been trying to protect Lily from making a mistake by staying in a relationship with someone who was not capable of genuine emotional connection and who was too controlled and calculating to be a healthy, long-term partner. I found this characterization interesting because it revealed that Kara's objection to me was not based on any actual evidence of wrongdoing or mistreatment, but rather on her subjective judgment that my calm, rational approach to problem-solving and conflict management was somehow indicative of emotional dysfunction or hidden cruelty. I moved to the fifth item on my timeline, which was the accidental voicemail recording that had captured the planning conversation for this stage test breakup, and I explained that I had saved the audio file and had created a transcript of the key phrases that were clearly audible, despite the muffled quality of the recording. I did not play the audio out loud because I thought that might be too confrontational and might create a level of humiliation for Maya, whose phone had made the accidental call. But I did offer to let anyone who wanted to verify the existence and the content of the recording listen to it privately on my phone with headphones. Jessica, who had been largely quiet up to this point, asked if she could listen to the recording because she wanted to understand exactly what had been said during the planning conversation, and I handed her my phone with headphones attached and watched her face as she listened to the 3-minute audio file. Her expression changed multiple times during the listening process, from curiosity to surprise to something that looked like anger or betrayal. And when she finished listening, she removed the headphones and looked at Kara and said that this was not what she had agreed to be part of and that she had thought they were genuinely concerned about me based on real evidence, rather than staging an elaborate manipulation based on screenshots that Kara had apparently fabricated. Kara tried to argue that the screenshots were not fabricated, but rather were based on legitimate concerns that she had heard from other sources about my character and my behavior patterns. But when Jessica pressed her to identify what sources she was referring to and what specific incidents had raised these concerns, Kara became vague and defensive and said that she was protecting her sources and that not everything needed to be documented and verified in order to be valid. Maya interrupted at that point and said that actually, when you were asking a group of friends to participate in a confrontation that could end someone's 3-year relationship, then yes, everything did need to be documented and verified, and that it was not acceptable to stage this kind of intervention based on vague concerns and manufactured evidence. I could see the dynamic in the room shifting significantly as the friends who had initially been positioned as a unified panel of judges were now fracturing into different camps based on their individual assessments of what the evidence actually showed and what Kara's role had been in creating this situation. Lily was still standing near the window, but her posture had changed from tense and angry to something much more uncertain and confused, and she kept looking back and forth between me and Kara as though she was trying to understand which of us was telling the truth and which of us was manipulating her. I returned to my timeline and moved to the 6th and final item, which was the information I had discovered about Derek Tate's professional reputation and the ethics violations that had resulted in his company losing contracts with several venues over the past 2 years. I produced printouts of the industry forum discussions where venue managers had documented concerns about Derek's company requesting kickback arrangements and engaging in overbilling practices, and I explained that Derek's company had been flagged by multiple professional organizations as a vendor that required additional oversight and verification before being awarded contracts for high-profile events. I then looked directly at Kara, and I said that I found it interesting that she had been so focused on testing my character and my trustworthiness when her own fiancé had a documented history of professional misconduct and questionable business practices, and I asked whether she had been aware of Derek's reputation within the industry or whether that information had been concealed from her, in the same way that she had tried to conceal information and manufacture narratives for everyone else in this room. Kara's face went completely white at that statement, and she said that Derek's business practices had nothing to do with this conversation, and that I was deflecting from my own behavior by attacking someone who was not even present to defend himself. I responded calmly that I was not attacking Derek, but rather pointing out that there was a pattern of deception and manipulation that seemed to involve multiple people in overlapping ways, and that if Kara was genuinely concerned about protecting Lily from relationships with people who were not trustworthy, then perhaps she should have been more concerned about the amount of time that Lily was spending with a man who had been fired from multiple contracts for ethics violations. Lily spoke up at that point and asked what I meant by the amount of time she was spending with Derek, and I explained that, according to Jesse's observations and my own verification, through calendar analysis and vehicle location tracking. Lily had been meeting with Derek at venues during evening hours on a regular basis over the past 2 months, and that those meetings had been concealed through vague calendar entries and false statements about family dinners and nonprofit planning sessions. Lily's voice was shaking when she said that her meetings with Derek had been entirely professional and related to learning vendor coordination skills that would help her advance in her nonprofit career, and that Derek had been serving as a mentor who was teaching her about contract negotiation and relationship management with event service providers. I nodded and said that I understood that was her perception of what those meetings were about, but that I was curious about why this mentorship arrangement had needed to be concealed through false alibis, and why Kara, who was engaged to Derek, had been simultaneously encouraging Lily to break her lease and relocate while also staging a test breakup designed to end Lily's relationship with me. Maya asked the question that I think several people in the room were starting to formulate in their own minds, which was whether Kara had known about Derek's professional relationship with Lily, and whether Kara had been trying to manage that relationship by removing me from the picture and encouraging Lily to relocate to a different city where whatever was happening between Lily and Derek would be less visible and less likely to be discovered by mutual acquaintances and family members. Kara stood up abruptly at that point and said that she did not have to sit here and listen to baseless accusations about her motives and her relationship, and that if everyone was going to take my side based on some carefully curated timeline and some out-of-context screenshots, then she was leaving. Kara stood up abruptly at that point and said that she did not have to sit here and listen to baseless accusations about her motives and her relationship, and that if everyone was going to take my side based on some carefully curated timeline and some out-of-context screenshots, then she was leaving and they could all figure out the truth for themselves without her guidance or protection. Maya moved quickly to position herself between Kara and the door, and said in a firm voice that nobody was leaving until they had finished this conversation and had gotten clear answers about what had actually been happening, and why Kara had felt entitled to manipulate the entire friend group into participating in a staged confrontation based on fabricated evidence. Jessica stood up from the couch as well and said that she wanted to know specifically where the screenshots had come from that Kara had sent to the group chat claiming to show messages that I had sent to another woman, and she pointed out that if those screenshots were fabricated, then Kara had deliberately lied to all of them and had convinced them to participate in something that was not a protective intervention, but rather a malicious setup designed to destroy my relationship with Lily for reasons that had nothing to do with my actual character or behavior. Kara's face had become flushed, and her voice was rising as she insisted that the screenshots had been based on credible information from sources that she was protecting, and that she had every right to test whether I was the kind of person who would remain calm and controlled even when facing the loss of something important, or whether I would reveal a darker, more volatile side of my personality when put under pressure. I spoke up at that point and said that I understood Kara's stated concern about testing my reactions and my emotional regulation, but that I was confused about why such a test would require fabricating evidence of infidelity rather than simply having an honest conversation about relationship concerns or compatibility issues. I pointed out that the decision to manufacture false screenshots and to create a narrative about messages that did not exist suggested that the goal was not actually to reveal my true character, but rather to create a predetermined outcome where I would be cast as the villain regardless of what the actual facts showed about my behavior or my trustworthiness. Lily, who had been standing silently near the window, finally spoke up and asked Kara directly whether Derek knew about this test breakup plan and whether he had been involved in creating the fabricated screenshots or in deciding that this confrontation needed to happen. Kara hesitated for several seconds before saying that Derek knew generally that she had concerns about me and about whether I was good enough for Lily, but that he had not been directly involved in planning this specific gathering or in creating any evidence. I found this answer interesting because it was phrased in a way that admitted Derek's awareness of Kara's concerns while denying his active participation, which suggested that there had been conversations between Kara and Derek about me and about my relationship with Lily that had informed Kara's decision to stage this intervention. Maya asked Lily whether she had known that Kara and Derek had been discussing concerns about me and whether Lily had been part of those conversations, or whether Kara had been conducting this campaign to end my relationship with Lily without fully informing Lily about the scope and the nature of Kara's activities. Lily said that Kara had mentioned on several occasions that she thought I was too emotionally distant and too focused on logic and documentation rather than feelings and spontaneity, and that Kara had suggested that maybe I was not capable of the kind of deep emotional intimacy that Lily deserved in a long-term partnership. However, Lily also said that she had not realized that Kara was planning to create a test scenario or to fabricate evidence, and that she had believed the screenshots that Kara had sent to the group chat were real messages that I had actually sent. I asked Lily if I could see the screenshots that Kara had sent to the group chat because I was genuinely curious about what the fabricated messages had said, and how convincing they had appeared to someone who knew my communication style and my relationship with Lily. Lily pulled out her phone and opened the group chat and scrolled back to find the images that Kara had sent. And after a moment, she handed me her phone with a confused expression and said that the screenshots seemed to have been deleted from the chat history and that she could not find them anymore. I looked at the group chat on Lily's phone and confirmed that there were no images visible in the conversation thread from the time period when Kara would have sent the fabricated screenshots, and I pointed out that this deletion suggested that Kara had used a feature that allowed messages to be automatically removed after a certain time period, which would make it much harder to examine the screenshots closely or to verify their authenticity. Jessica immediately pulled out her own phone and checked the group chat from her perspective, and she confirmed that the screenshots were also missing from her message history, and that the only reference to them was a text message from Kara saying that she had sent important evidence that everyone needed to see before the gathering tonight. Maya checked her phone as well and found the same pattern of missing images with only Kara's text message claiming that she had shared screenshots, remaining visible in the chat history. This discovery seemed to shift the mood in the room even more dramatically because it demonstrated that Kara had deliberately used disappearing message features to prevent anyone from examining the fabricated evidence too closely or from comparing the screenshots to my actual phone records in a way that would immediately reveal that the messages had never existed. I said that I appreciated everyone's willingness to investigate this situation thoroughly rather than simply accepting the narrative that had been presented to them, and I acknowledged that it must be uncomfortable and confusing to realize that a close friend had been manipulating group dynamics and manufacturing crises for purposes that were not yet entirely clear. I then returned my attention to the timeline document and pointed out that we still had not addressed the central question of why Kara had been so invested in ending my relationship with Lily and in encouraging Lily to relocate to a different city, and I suggested that perhaps the answer to that question had less to do with concerns about my character and more to do with managing the visibility and the potential consequences of the relationship between Lily and Derek. Lily's voice was sharp when she said that there was no relationship between her and Derek beyond a professional mentorship arrangement, and that I was making unfounded accusations based on a few coincidental sightings at venues, where they both had legitimate reasons to be present. I responded calmly that I was not making accusations, but rather presenting factual observations and documented patterns, and that if the meetings with Derek were genuinely innocent professional mentorship sessions, then I was confused about why they had needed to be concealed through false alibis about family dinners, and why Lily's calendar entries for those meetings had been deliberately vague and lacking in the kind of specific details that would allow anyone to verify what was actually happening. Maya asked Lily directly whether she had told me that she was at a family dinner on the night of the charity gala when she had actually been at the event with Derek, and Lily's face showed a flash of something that looked like guilt or recognition before she said that she might have gotten confused about which night was the family dinner and which night was the work event. Jessica pointed out that it seemed like a significant detail to be confused about, especially since the gala was a major fundraising event that Lily's organization had been preparing for over several months, and that the explanation of simple confusion did not really account for why Lily had not corrected the misunderstanding when she came home that night or at any point during the following days. I could see Lily struggling with how to respond to this line of questioning, and I could see her looking at Kara as though seeking guidance or support. But Kara had become silent and withdrawn, and was no longer offering the confident assertions and defensive explanations that had characterized her earlier participation in the conversation. I decided at that point to introduce one final piece of information that I had been holding in reserve, which was the photograph I had taken of Lily's car parked in the vendor area of one of the venues on a night when she had told me she was at a nonprofit planning session that was running late. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery and found the image showing Lily's distinctive blue sedan with its nonprofit organization parking permit clearly visible in the windshield, and I passed my phone to Lily and asked her if she could explain why her car had been parked in the vendor service area rather than in the main client parking lot if she had been attending a legitimate nonprofit planning meeting at that venue. Lily looked at the photograph, and her hands started shaking as she held my phone, and she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper that she must have parked in the wrong area by mistake, or that the main lot must have been full and she had needed to find alternative parking. Maya asked to see the photograph, and Lily handed her my phone, and Maya studied the image carefully before pointing out that the vendor service area was typically locked and required a key card or a vendor access code to enter, and that it seemed unlikely that Lily would have been able to park there by accident unless she had been given access credentials by someone who worked in vendor services. I explained that this was exactly the conclusion I had reached when I saw the photograph, and that the most logical explanation was that Derek, who worked as a vendor liaison for his company, had provided Lily with access to the restricted parking area so that her vehicle would be less visible to other nonprofit coordinators or venue staff, who might recognize her car and might wonder why she was at the venue during hours when no scheduled nonprofit events were taking place. Lily set my phone down on the coffee table and walked back to the window and stood with her back to the room, and I could see her shoulders shaking in a way that suggested she was either crying or trying very hard not to cry. The room was silent for a long moment, and then Jessica said that she thought they all owed me an apology for participating in this confrontation without asking more questions about the evidence they had been shown, and without considering the possibility that they were being manipulated into attacking someone who had not actually done anything wrong. Maya agreed and said that she felt terrible about the way this evening had unfolded, and that she had genuinely believed that they were helping Lily escape from an unhealthy relationship, but that it was now clear that the unhealthy dynamic was not between Lily and me, but rather between Kara and everyone else in the room, who had been treated as pawns in whatever scheme Kara had been pursuing. The third friend, whose name I had learned was Ashley, said that she wanted to know what they should do now and whether they should confront Derek directly about his relationship with Lily and about his involvement in Kara's plan to destroy my relationship. I said that I did not think it was productive or necessary to confront Derek because the facts were already clear to everyone who was willing to look at them objectively, and that the more important question was what Lily wanted to do with this information and whether she was prepared to be honest with herself and with me about what had been happening over the past several months. I walked over to where Lily was standing at the window, and I said her name softly, and when she turned around her face was streaked with tears, and her expression showed a mixture of shame and confusion and anger that seemed to be directed both at herself and at the situation that had been created around her. Lily said that she had never meant for any of this to happen, and that her meetings with Derek had started as genuine professional mentorship, where he was teaching her about vendor contract negotiation and relationship management, but that over time the meetings had become more frequent and more personal, and she had found herself looking forward to seeing him in ways that went beyond professional interest. She said that she had known that the situation was becoming inappropriate, but that she had told herself that as long as nothing physical happened between them, then it was not really cheating, and it was not really a betrayal of our relationship. Lily said that she had never meant for any of this to happen, and that her meetings with Derek had started as genuine professional mentorship, where he was teaching her about vendor contract negotiation and relationship management, but that over time the meetings had become more frequent and more personal, and she had found herself looking forward to seeing him in ways that went beyond professional interest. She said that she had known that the situation was becoming inappropriate, but that she had told herself that as long as nothing physical happened between them, then it was not really cheating, and it was not really a betrayal of our relationship, and that she had convinced herself that the excitement and the emotional connection she felt with Derek were just natural responses to having a mentor who paid attention to her career goals and who made her feel valued in ways that were different from how I made her feel valued. I asked Lily directly whether anything physical had happened between her and Derek at any point during their months of meetings and venue appearances together, and she hesitated for a long moment before saying that there had been one occasion about 3 weeks ago when they had stayed late at a venue after an event had ended and Derek had kissed her, and she had not stopped him immediately, but had let the kiss continue for several seconds before pulling away and telling him that they could not do that again. She said that after that incident she had felt guilty and confused and had tried to create some distance from Derek by canceling a few of their scheduled meetings, but that Kara had noticed the change in her behavior and had started asking questions about whether something had happened between them. I found this timeline significant because it meant that Kara had known, or at least strongly suspected, that there was an inappropriate relationship developing between Lily and her fiancé Derek, and rather than confronting Derek or ending her engagement or addressing the situation directly with Lily, Kara had instead decided to stage an elaborate manipulation designed to make me appear to be the problem and to pressure Lily into ending our relationship so that Lily would relocate to a different city and would no longer be a visible presence in Derek's professional and social circles. I said this observation out loud to the room, and I pointed out that Kara's behavior suggested that she was more invested in maintaining control over the narrative and over Derek's reputation than she was in actually protecting Lily from harm or in addressing the real betrayal that had occurred when her fiancé had kissed one of her closest friends. Maya said that she was horrified by this entire situation and that she could not believe that Kara had been manipulating all of them while simultaneously covering for Derek's inappropriate behavior with Lily, and that it seemed clear now that the test breakup had never been about protecting Lily, but had rather been about protecting Kara's relationship with Derek by eliminating the evidence of his infidelity and by making me into a villain who deserved to be abandoned. Jessica added that this kind of manipulation was not the behavior of a true friend, but rather the behavior of someone who was willing to sacrifice other people's well-being and other people's relationships in order to maintain her own comfort and her own social position. Lily turned to face the room again, and she looked directly at Kara, and she said in a voice that was shaking with emotion that she wanted to know whether Kara had known about the kiss between her and Derek, and whether Kara had staged this entire test breakup as a way to punish Lily, or to remove her from Derek's life without having to confront Derek about his behavior. Kara's expression had shifted from defensive anger to something that looked almost like resignation or defeat. And after a long silence, she said that yes, she had suspected that something had happened between Lily and Derek because Derek had become distant and distracted in the weeks following what Kara now understood had been the night of the kiss. Kara said that when she had asked Derek directly whether anything had happened between him and Lily, he had admitted to the kiss, but had characterized it as a moment of weakness that had not been repeated and that did not threaten his commitment to their engagement, and he had asked Kara to help him manage the situation by encouraging Lily to create some distance so that the inappropriate feelings could fade naturally without creating a public scandal or damaging anyone's professional reputation. Kara said that she had agreed to help Derek with this plan because she loved him and because she believed that their relationship was worth fighting for, and that she had genuinely convinced herself that I was not good enough for Lily, and that ending our relationship would ultimately be better for everyone involved, even if the methods she used to accomplish that goal were not entirely honest or straightforward. I listened to this explanation with a mixture of fascination and disgust, because it revealed so clearly how Kara had rationalized her manipulation and her betrayal of Lily's trust by framing it as protective friendship rather than as self-serving damage control designed to protect her own relationship at Lily's expense. I said that I appreciated Kara's honesty in finally admitting what her actual motivations had been, but that I was troubled by the fact that she still seemed to believe that her actions had been justified by her desire to preserve her engagement to Derek, rather than recognizing that the appropriate response to discovering that your fiancé had kissed one of your close friends would be to address that betrayal directly, rather than to manufacture elaborate schemes to manipulate everyone around you. Maya said that she agreed completely with my assessment and that she was finished being part of Kara's friend group if this was the kind of behavior that Kara considered acceptable. And Jessica and Ashley both nodded in agreement and said that they had lost trust in Kara's judgment and her integrity, and that they needed to seriously reconsider whether this friendship was healthy or worth maintaining. Kara looked around at the faces of the friends who had been her loyal supporters and participants in her schemes, and she seemed to recognize that the social power and influence that she had wielded so effectively up until this evening had evaporated in the space of this one brutal conversation. Kara stood up and said that she was leaving, and that they could all judge her and condemn her if they wanted to, but that she had been trying to protect people she cared about even if her methods had been flawed, and she walked toward the door without waiting for anyone to respond or to try to stop her. Maya did not move to block her exit this time, and Kara opened the door and walked out into the hallway, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed much quieter and less dramatic than the emotional intensity of everything that had preceded that moment. After Kara left the apartment, there was a long silence where nobody seemed to know what to say or how to process everything that had been revealed over the past hour, and I could see that Lily was still standing by the window crying silently, and that the other friends were looking at each other with expressions that combined shock and embarrassment and anger at having been manipulated so thoroughly. I walked over to the coffee table and began gathering up the documents from my evidence folder and putting them back into the clear plastic sleeves, and Maya asked me if I was leaving or if I was willing to stay and talk through what should happen next, now that the truth about Kara's manipulation and Derek's behavior had been exposed. I said that I was willing to stay for a little while longer, but that ultimately the decisions about what happened next needed to be made by Lily rather than by me or by the friend group, and that I did not want to pressure her or make her feel like she had to choose between different options before she had time to think clearly about what she actually wanted. Lily turned away from the window and walked over to where I was standing, and she said that she was so sorry for everything that had happened and for not being honest with me about her meetings with Derek and for allowing Kara to manipulate her into participating in a staged breakup based on false evidence. I said that I appreciated her apology and that I understood that she had been in a complicated situation where she was receiving conflicting information and pressure from multiple sources, but that I also needed her to understand that the pattern of deception and concealment that I had documented over the past several weeks was not something that I could simply overlook or forget now that it had been exposed. I explained that trust was the foundation of any healthy relationship, and that once that trust had been damaged through deliberate lies and false alibis, it required significant time and effort and consistent, honest behavior to rebuild, and that I was not yet certain whether I believed that our relationship could recover from this level of betrayal. Lily said that she understood why I would feel that way and that she did not expect me to forgive her immediately or to pretend that nothing had happened, but that she wanted me to know that she had never stopped caring about me and that the emotional connection she had developed with Derek had been based partly on genuine professional admiration, but also partly on her own insecurities about whether I truly valued her or whether I was just staying with her out of habit or convenience. I found this explanation interesting because it suggested that Lily had created a narrative in her own mind where my calm, rational approach to our relationship was evidence of lack of passion or lack of genuine emotional investment, and that Derek's attention and his willingness to engage with her in ways that felt more spontaneous and less controlled had seemed to fill a need that she believed was not being met in our relationship. I asked Lily whether she had ever communicated these concerns to me directly before she began spending significant amounts of time with Derek, and whether she had given me an opportunity to understand what she needed from our relationship or to adjust my behavior in ways that would have made her feel more valued and more emotionally connected. Lily was quiet for a moment, and then she admitted that no, she had not communicated these concerns clearly because she had been afraid that I would respond with logic and problem-solving rather than with the kind of emotional validation and spontaneous affection that she was craving, and that it had seemed easier to seek those things from Derek, who offered them freely without requiring her to articulate what she wanted or needed. Maya spoke up at that point and said that while she understood that relationships required work and communication from both partners, it was not fair for Lily to blame me for not meeting needs that I had never been told existed, and that the choice to seek emotional fulfillment from another person rather than addressing the issues directly with me was a choice that Lily had made and needed to take responsibility for, regardless of what insecurities or unmet needs had motivated that choice. Jessica agreed and said that part of being an adult in a relationship was learning to communicate clearly about your needs and your feelings, rather than expecting your partner to intuitively understand what you wanted without being told. I thanked Maya and Jessica for their observations, and I said that I agreed that communication was essential, but that I also recognized that I had perhaps been so focused on maintaining calm and avoiding conflict that I had not created enough space for Lily to feel comfortable expressing vulnerability or uncertainty without fear that I would respond with detached problem-solving rather than with empathy and emotional support. I said that if we were going to have any chance of rebuilding trust and moving forward together, then we would both need to be willing to examine our own contributions to the patterns that had led to this crisis, and that I could not place all of the blame on Lily's choices without also acknowledging that there might have been ways that I had inadvertently contributed to her feeling emotionally disconnected or undervalued. Lily looked at me with an expression that showed surprise and something that might have been gratitude or relief, and she said that she appreciated my willingness to consider my own role in the relationship dynamics, even though she knew that the primary responsibility for the deception and the inappropriate relationship with Derek belonged to her. She asked me whether I thought there was any possibility that we could work through this situation together, or whether I had already decided that the betrayal was too significant to overcome, and I told her honestly that I did not know yet what I wanted or what I believed was possible. I explained that I needed time to process everything that had been revealed tonight and to think carefully about whether I could genuinely forgive the months of lies and concealment, and whether I could rebuild trust with someone who had demonstrated a willingness to deceive me repeatedly in order to avoid difficult conversations or uncomfortable confrontations. I said that I also needed to understand more about what Lily actually wanted from our relationship going forward and whether she was prepared to end all contact with Derek and to be completely transparent about her schedule and her activities and her emotional connections with other people, or whether she still felt that she needed something from Derek or from the kind of attention he provided that she did not believe she could get from me. Lily said that she wanted to be completely honest with me going forward and that she was willing to end all contact with Derek and to be transparent about everything in her life if that was what it would take to earn back my trust, but that she also needed me to understand that her attraction to Derek had not been primarily about him as an individual, but rather about the way he had made her feel seen and valued and interesting in ways that she had been craving. She said that if we were going to rebuild our relationship, then she needed me to be willing to be more emotionally present and more willing to engage with her feelings and her experiences in ways that went beyond practical problem-solving and logical analysis. I said that I understood what she was asking for, and that I was willing to work on being more emotionally available and more attentive to her need for validation and spontaneous affection, but that I also needed her to understand that my calm, rational approach was not evidence of lack of caring, but rather was simply the way that I processed the world and managed stress and made decisions. I explained that I could not become a completely different person just because she preferred a different communication style, but that I could make conscious efforts to balance my natural tendencies toward logic and documentation with more intentional expressions of emotion and more frequent verbal affirmations of my feelings for her. Maya suggested at that point that perhaps Lily and I needed to have some private time to talk through these issues without the entire friend group present as witnesses and participants, and she offered to let us stay in her apartment to continue the conversation while she and Jessica and Ashley went out to give us privacy for as long as we needed. I appreciated Maya's offer, and I looked at Lily to see whether she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity for private conversation, and Lily nodded and said that yes, she thought it would be helpful for us to talk without an audience and without the pressure of having to perform our reconciliation or our decision-making process in front of other people. Maya and Jessica and Ashley gathered their phones and their jackets and said that they would be at the coffee shop down the street for at least an hour and that we should text when we were finished talking, and then they left the apartment and closed the door behind them, leaving Lily and me alone together in the quiet living room that just minutes before had been filled with tension and accusations and revelations. Lily sat down on the couch, and I sat down in the armchair across from her, maintaining some physical distance because I was not yet ready for the kind of close, intimate conversation that sitting beside her would have implied, and we looked at each other for a long moment before either of us spoke. Lily said that she knew I probably needed time and space to think about everything that had happened tonight, and that she did not expect me to make any immediate decisions about whether I wanted to continue our relationship or whether the betrayal was too significant to overcome, but that she wanted me to know that she genuinely regretted the choices she had made and the pain that those choices had caused me. She said that she had been selfish and cowardly in choosing to seek emotional validation from Derek, rather than addressing her concerns with me directly, and that she understood now that Kara had been manipulating her and using her vulnerability and her insecurities to serve Kara's own agenda of protecting Derek's reputation and preserving her engagement. I told Lily that I appreciated her acknowledgement of responsibility and her willingness to be honest about what had happened between her and Derek, and that I recognized that she had been operating in a complicated situation where a trusted friend had been feeding her false information and encouraging her to make choices that ultimately served Kara's interests rather than Lily's well-being. However, I also said that I could not ignore the fact that Lily had made active choices over a period of several months to lie to me about her whereabouts and to conceal her meetings with Derek and to participate in a staged test breakup based on fabricated evidence, and that those choices demonstrated a willingness to prioritize her own comfort and her desire to avoid conflict over her commitment to honesty and transparency in our relationship. Lily nodded, and tears began streaming down her face again as she said that she knew she had damaged our relationship in ways that might not be repairable, and that she would understand if I decided that I could not trust her again or that I did not want to invest the time and emotional energy that would be required to rebuild what had been broken. She said that regardless of what I decided about our relationship, she was going to end all contact with Derek immediately, and she was going to have a direct conversation with Kara about how Kara's manipulation and interference had damaged their friendship irreparably. I said that those were important steps, but that they were really just the beginning of what would need to happen if there was going to be any possibility of rebuilding trust between us, and that I would need to see consistent, honest, transparent behavior over an extended period of time before I could begin to feel confident that the patterns of deception and concealment had truly ended. I explained that I was not the kind of person who could simply decide to forgive and forget and move forward as though nothing had happened, and that my natural inclination toward documentation and verification meant that I would probably be hypervigilant about monitoring Lily's behavior and looking for signs of continued deception for quite some time. Lily said that she understood that she had created that dynamic through her own choices, and that she could not expect me to simply take her word for anything after months of systematic lying, and that she was prepared to accept whatever level of scrutiny or verification I needed in order to feel secure. She asked me whether I thought it would be helpful for us to work with a relationship counselor or therapist who could provide a neutral perspective and help us develop better communication patterns and strategies for rebuilding trust. I said that I was open to the idea of counseling, but that I wanted to take some time first to think about whether I actually wanted to invest in rebuilding this relationship, or whether it would be healthier for both of us to acknowledge that the damage was too significant, and to end things now before we put more emotional energy into something that might not ultimately be salvageable. I stood up from the armchair and picked up my laptop bag, and I told Lily that I was going to go home and spend some time alone processing everything that had been revealed tonight. Lily stood up as well and asked me if I wanted her to stay at Maya's apartment or with her parents for a few days to give me space in our shared apartment, and I said that yes, I thought that would probably be helpful because I needed solitude and quiet in order to think clearly about what I wanted. Lily nodded and said that she would pack a bag and would let me know where she was staying, and then she walked over to me and asked if she could hug me before I left. I hesitated for a moment, and then I said that I was not ready for physical affection yet, but that I appreciated her asking rather than assuming, and Lily's face showed pain at my rejection, but she nodded and stepped back and said that she understood. I walked to the door and opened it and looked back at Lily one more time before I left, and I could see that she was crying again, but I did not have the emotional capacity to offer comfort or reassurance in that moment, so I simply said goodnight and walked out into the hallway and heard the door close softly behind me as I made my way toward the elevator that would take me down to the street and back to my van and back to the apartment that would be empty and quiet and mine alone for the first time in 3 years.